Every physical object has an equivalent in the spirit world, as above, so below. Like you see your reflection in the water, and that reflection is more of a visualized concept of yourself versus the material you that could never see the concept because you just exist, if that makes sense. How do I put this? A good example is the video game series Dishonored, where there's this alternate dimension called the Void, ruled by an entity called the Outsider. And your supernatural abilities as an assassin are through having a linking sigil connected to your hand that gives you the ability to teleport and do all sorts of freak shit. And when you actually travel into the Void in your dreams, I guess, you can see fragments, islands, like that look like they're ripped from physical existence, that show paused moments of assassination, of comfort with your family, of people walking down the street, right? And basically, in the material universe, our present moment, me sitting here in this chair, in this building, there is a floating island in the astral realm where I'm sitting in this chair, in this store, and it's just frozen. And it's the concept of me in this situation in the spirit world. And spirits interact with us not through like physically coming here, but through coming onto the island and communicating to this version of us that's in this floating kind of paused moment of the present, right? And since there is no present in the spirit world, there are trillions of billions of these, right? So even though the present doesn't, or the past and future doesn't exist in the materium, spiritually, every present that has ever been presented, pun intended, exists in the astral, right? And since our worlds are connected, they're actually part of the same world. They're just very distinct from each other. They're interlocked like rings, or whatever, with the veil being this kind of membrane that balances out spiritual and material principle, reality, between each other, and it can thin like an October where more spooky stuff happens, or it can thicken during certain times of the year. Basically, how do I put this? I don't believe that tarot, oracle bones, casting the runes and things like that, I don't believe it's a way to gain subconscious information. I know people that believe that, and when they practice tarot and things like that, they believe it's a way to access subconscious information within themselves. I rather, on a more schizo note, believe that divination itself is a way of echolocation. It's a way of activating a telegraph, so to speak, or a Morse code, a reverberation of information in different levels of frequency and symbolism across the multiverse, which I believe the multiverse itself, time, taking time in Varkalia, I don't think the multiverse is alternate timelines. I think it's a mixture between time and Varkalia. And how do I put this? Basically, when we... is that my boss? That is my boss. Hold on. I'm of the opinion that it's very similar to, a spider on the spider web, and then a fly, goes on the web, right? And, how do I put this? Basically, it can sense the vibration throughout the web, right? And this web is made out of our present and the different presences in the spirit world, right? These captured photographs, these bits of concept and information. And the spider can use this kind of tapping, this cosmic spider web, to find the fly, so to speak. So, you get major symbolism, like basic concepts in major arcana, versus like the more complicated, like subtle meanings in, minor arcana. It's basically, if let's say, for example, you have the Chariot, just victory or whatever, right? And you randomly pull that, the symbolism of it. Its position is in the past, so you might have had a great victory in the past, right? So there's no way for the card to actually gain information about your past in the physical universe because it doesn't exist. And so it basically you're tapping the spider web, and the information for the past, it goes to a moment where you were victorious. And then in the past section, when you flip the card and it shows the chariot, it's a concept or whatever, like information, electricity traveling through a wire, all these complicated things in the form of electricity. It's hard for me to even understand how information travels through copper wires, but it's a very similar type of thing. And your past is represented through this kind of metaphor of the chariot, this representation. Your present is the tower. It's struggle. Maybe it's the death card, whatever it is. It's transformation. It's not a good situation for you. And you flip it, and it's like kind of tapping into the present moment that is projected through concept in the spirit world, and then it just comes back to you in the form of that card. Same thing with advice, right? There are different potential presents based off of your decisions, and because you made that decision, it's in the astral, and because you might have made a different decision, it's also in the astral. So basically the potential outcomes of the future, you're tapping on the spider web, and this information goes to the most likely bad thing that's going to happen in the future, right? And then it comes back to you, and then that's represented through the metaphor of whatever arcana of the card you flip. So this is the future that's going to happen. So how do I avoid it? And you're tapping the spider web into a present moment where you made the right decision. And then that information comes back to you in the form of the advice card, and whatever you flip gives you this kind of advice as to what you did in that present moment, right? But I'm artificially separating them and making them separate when they're just distinct, right? So within Midgard, you have what I would view as the Varkalia timelines, where basically I imagine it like sections of DNA, and I imagine it in a loop. This isn't relevant to this video, but I believe that time is a circular type of thing. So this is impossible in the physical universe, but I believe that if I were to get inside a coffin made out of an impossible material like adamantium, and it preserves me in stasis, and you just drop it off in the ocean, and nothing can destroy it. It'll always remain. I believe that as the cycles, as the yugas pass, basically it's like I can't go back to the present moment of 2007, right? But if I'm in this coffin, right, as the years go by in the physical universe, and as the planet Earth is destroyed, as the suns die out, 10 trillion quadbillion, and just made that number up, years in the future, the timeline resets, and then I'm in the ancient past, where the Big Bang happened, right? And I wait another incomprehensible amount of years, and then it's the year 2007, indistinguishably the same world, same people, same politicians, same economy, and it's just happening again. I believe Nietzsche covered this in the concept of eternal reoccurrence, but I believe you can travel back in time through in a hypothesis, not theory, as theoretically it's not possible, but if you could manage to preserve yourself in such a device, you could travel backwards in time by being flung incomprehensible years in the future. And I believe it goes around in a circle, right? But there are also different decisions that you make that are preserved in the astral, and then these different situations become different timelines. So there's derivatives, and sometimes, and I imagine it as a green chain of DNA and RNA, pieces breaking off, and sometimes this circle, this loop, is cut, and then it branches off into two circles of themselves, or sometimes connects to another timeline, right? So this is a weird type of thing. I believe there are corrupted timelines that are not necessarily bad in and of themselves, but they don't function in a way that's comprehensible. So let's say the year is 1400, right, in England, right? And now we have in our timeline, the year 2025, in England, right? Let's say Lincolnshire, right? If the timeline, this DNA chain, cuts off, right, and then the year 1400 in Lincolnshire, England, it's cut off on its end, right? And this present 2025 England can actually merge with 1400s Lincolnshire, and then the future, the next year, without us noticing, with it almost being seamless. Next thing you know, next year, everything is just 1400s Lincolnshire, and the material and the people from that timeline exist in Lincolnshire, England. Then time continues. And sometimes it works so seamlessly that it's incomprehensible, and sometimes it's fucking retarded, and there is no redeeming quality. It's just a chaos timeline that is completely fucked. And sometimes I think there are broken off chains of timelines, time and Varkalia timelines rather, that are just little sections that have no circular loop, that are just floating like junk DNA in a body, and they have no purpose. Like, there is an end of presence where it's like when you reach the end of that timeline, you're just stationary and standing there doing what you were, and it's like we're all frozen and paused, and we're just standing here like a mannequin for a horrible amount of time. And sometimes these things, like a cancer, like a corrupted cell, will merge, and you'll have a new loop consisting of thousands of different segments of timelines that have nothing to do with each other. And there's one that I've channeled in Gnosis. I call it the Mythic Reich, where basically you have these anomalies like the Bermuda Triangle. In my kind of weird schizo vision of channeling it, there's a timeline that consists of multiple timelines, kind of junk thrown away timelines that recombined, and it has like soldiers from Weimar Germany, soldiers from the British Empire in the 1700s, Nazis from the Third Reich, people from factions that exist hundreds of millions of years from now, and ancient like Babylonian people in the past, all living side by side with dinosaurs, aliens, horse wagons, and UFOs. And that this could happen to our timeline at any point, and we would not notice it until we noticed it, if that makes sense. So that's a terrifying concept, right? So I believe it's reflections of each other. And again, this isn't fully related to the video. This is just more Gnosis to help make sense of Midgard. And this is using Warhammer 40k logic. In Warhammer 40k, there are the Catan, which are creatures, conscious, sentient creatures that are gods of the material universe. They have no soul, no magic, no psychic essence, but they can shoot flames from their hands, they can snap their fingers and destroy planets, and their physics turned into physical creatures. They're manifestations of the entropic material world turned into deities that are often omnipresent and nearly unstoppable. And if you were to kill a monstrous Catan, that like the death Catan in Warhammer, it fucks up mortality and really just twists the logic of the universe until that eventually heals and remanifests in a new Reaper. Whereas in the warp, in the immaterial, you have thousands of people in a certain emotional state throwing their emotions like a pebble into a pile till it becomes a mountain, and then you have a being of that emotion and concept, like an egregor, either intentionally or accidentally born as a manifestation of that thing, creating an entire subsection of the spirit world that makes it a chaos god. Well, I believe, on the other end, the very fabric, the nature of Arcalia, the nature of the astral realm, the mechanics of it, its equivalent of physics and things like that, can manifest in the form of gods that are actually just avatars of little ones and zeros, little fragments of the code that become their own autonomous entities that are made out of the fabric of that, as opposed to being something manipulated by an exterior force to be created for a specific purpose. I don't believe they're a creation of human emotion or some type of cosmic event in the physical world. They are like the kind of side dimension of the astral turned into physical form. Now, I believe there are physical equivalents of the Catan, where there are deities in my channeling. This is basically Lovecraftian gods like Cthulhu. These are beings that have an incomprehensible amount of knowledge and access to quantum physics and the material universe, and are completely cut off from the spirit world. Like beings like Cthulhu, I believe, are physical creatures that are massive, the size of skyscrapers, that can physically walk around and consume stuff and manipulate reality. And they are completely flesh and blood and have no soul and no afterlife. And if they were to be killed, you would have the Cloverfield paradox type of thing where reality starts to turn into an AI hallucination and it's no longer comprehensible, you know. And that to kill such beings is to kill our physical universe. I believe in my channeling, at least, I've seen these types of long beings made out of stars and other weird planetary bodies, like giant worms that are covered in eyeballs and teeth that, you know, are half as big as the Milky Way, slithering between the Milky Way and Andromeda. And I think one day when we're able to travel to Andromeda, we're going to go into that void between Andromeda and the Milky Way, and we're going to see some massive behemoth creature, a physical animal that shouldn't exist, and looking at it is going to make our eyes melt out of our heads. I think the gods of Lovecraft are very real, and I don't think they're spiritual. I do believe they have magic, but it's material magic. It's like an atheist magic. It's literally a type of science that is incomprehensible, and I call that type of magic psionics, which I'm ripping that from the Mind Flayers. But yeah, I believe there are entire races that are spawned from these beings too, and are almost artificial, because if that main being dies, that entire race dies off. And I believe they can be immortal if their main anchor being is alive, but if it's damaged because something like the demiurge wanted to fuck with us, then that entire race would die out. And I do believe there is a race like that. In my channelings, I call them the Saleuth, and they have the access to the back realms of our physical universe, where it's like you have an entire building full of lights and speakers, but then there's that hidden back room full of the power panels or whatever, the circuit breakers, and the back room where there is like computer coding, where you can set the settings of how the outer rooms that we physically inhabit are. And you can do all sorts of weird things if you have access to psionic abilities. I personally, I believe in the kind of mythical anomalies where you go into the middle of the woods and you see an obelisk that just shouldn't be there, or a flight of stairs deep in the wilderness where no human has been, or a weird type of thing where once in a while you'll see like a building with a sign that is like a stop sign that is somehow in the wall, right? Little glitches. And I think that has nothing to do with the spiritual. I think it has everything to do with the overall health of these creatures. And if they go to war with each other, things become a fever dream. Our physical reality becomes very psychedelic. It's supposed to be very rigid and grounded. I think there are physical flesh and blood creatures with organs and blood that if they die, we're fucked. Like planets will be able to have life without atmosphere, right? Or even with every aspect that you need on a planet to sustain life. Life will not be able to develop in oxygen with a magnetic core, with gravity and all that. And you can have life exist impossibly or not exist at all. And these creatures are a physical ledger of our reality. So I think there are quite literal physical gods that are like the size of Jupiter that exist in the corners of our physical universe, that are just made out of teeth, eyes, mouths. And in this kind of experience of channeling, I saw a planet that didn't move other than orbiting its sun and just looks like a regular planet. And the entire surface of a section of it is just a giant eyeball that looks around. I believe, and I call these beings anchor beings, right? And I think spiritually there are also entities that are just astral manifestations of the laws that define the astral realm. And I think that these greater gods of the immaterial realm that are just exist because the astral realm exists, I think they can't incarnate into a physical body. They're so potent in their distinction, they could never cross over into our realm, just as these Lovecraftian gods of the materium could never go into the spirit realm, because they are the most concentrated aspect of our respective distinctions. And I believe we live kind of near the border of the veil, right? We're close enough to the spiritual to have souls and spirits and things like that, right? But yeah, so that's something I believe exists, which might sound terrifying, but whatever. It might be cosmically terrifying, but I'm not a cosmic being. I'm just some dude that lives in Pennsylvania, so I'm not bothered. I do think there are beings like this that are asleep in the oceans of our planet and other oceans of other planets and under the planets of other planets, right? I think these beings do exist. Sometimes they eat planets that have civilizations on them or no civilizations, and one could just float and basically be Galactus from Marvel and just show up outside our planet. No spiritual, supernatural thing whatsoever. Purely a being composed of just scientific principles manifested into a physical flesh and blood sentient being. But I don't think that's going to happen. Why? I actually have no reason. I choose to be optimistic, blindly optimistic like that, which is ironic given my general pessimism of everything. But I walk carefree and just don't care. I'm like, okay, yeah, I think they exist, but it doesn't impact me in any way. But no, I think there are just physical gigantic kaijus that exist in our galaxy and other galaxies and the spaces in between. Oh, absolutely. And spiritual equivalents of these kaiju monsters, these elements of nature manifest in the astral, which I'm sure are just as equally terrifying to indigenous spirits and gods in the immaterial. They're probably like, oh, what is that? And probably its own equivalent of psionics, its own back rooms of the astral that only things that come from there can access. I think these beings could reset everything if they wanted to, but I don't think they would, as I don't think that's in their nature, right? But I think they're important because they serve as antibodies, because if, let's say, an outer god, a hyperpredator within the void, like Yaldabaoth, the lion-headed serpent, found a way to crack through our firmament into our material or immaterial universe, right? And this being that does not belong here, that is a foreign parasite, comes into our world, that's a reality-ending event. We're fucked. Unless Cthulhu pops out of nowhere and physically fights this creature and eviscerates it and physically banishes it back to the void of Gagundagap. I think that's why these creatures exist, so that much more terrifying creatures, if they get hungry and try to invade the spiritual or the physical, these beings pop up out of nowhere, and it turns into like a Godzilla versus King Ghidorah situation. And, God bless the poor collateral damage, just the random bystanders that are just like getting stomped on. But I think that's why these beings exist. I think they're functionally a way to maintain our respective realms, our lesser realms. And our greater realm is just all of us together, right? Now, I'll go even further and say that I don't believe that the physical and spiritual, one is better than the other. I believe they're equally as important and they're the same world. And, they're distinct and not separate. But I will say there is an exception. I believe the realm of the mercurial is superior, more superior than the physical or spiritual, and has probably the most ultimate beings. Now, it is intertwined with the spiritual and the material, the immaterium and materium, but I believe above us is an actual realm that doesn't have material matter or spiritual energy, right? And there are sentient beings that exist as pure consciousness that cannot access magic from the astral. They're not psychic creatures. They have no souls, no spirits. and they have no physical bodies or whatever. They're just pure consciousness, information, the mind. And these beings reproduce by exchanging thoughts, like literally ripping out memories out of themselves and then combining it with the memories of their spouse, and then creating a new type of entity that has its own type of mixed memories. And then it eats, it consumes, and thrives and grows by introspection or conversation. And that they basically grow and amass mass and power by keeping their thoughts deep within themselves. Now, I believe the inhabitants of this realm of the mercurial are what I would call the celestial dragons, the most powerful entities, more powerful than spiritual gods or physical abominations. These beings are pure knowledge. They don't have souls and they don't have bodies. There's no afterlife and there's no physical world. They exist without either, and yet, because they're above us, this consciousness, this thought, bleeds into the astral and the material. Well, I thought you said that the astral is the realm of concepts and ideas, right? Wouldn't that be the main realm of the mind in that case? Well, no, it's more to say that how do I put it? You have the concept as the reflection of the water. And then you have the material person looking into the water at their reflection. One is just the material, and the other is the concept of the material, right? But you're not looking at a reflection of the mind that is processing the reflection, right? You are looking at the reflection. So if there was no sentience, right? If a tree stood absently by a river, and the reflection of it was manifested on the water, right? That reflection, that concept would still be there, but no one would be there to process its existence. It would just be there, right? So the idea of it is still there, even if there is no mind or consciousness to process it. So concepts can exist without conscious, right? And basically, without the realm of the mercurial, you have a material universe and a conceptual universe that has no way of acknowledging its own existence, right? And it's because thoughts and consciousness bleed from the realm of the mercurial into the spiritual that you have, a notion of material, of matter, and a notion of consciousness, or rather concepts, a notion of concepts, right? So these beings are really weird and they freak me out. They scare the living shit out of me. They are horrifying. And I believe that if in the materium, very distinct, and its most distinct concentrated form, is the ultimate factor of, material existence, and vice versa with the astral, with the immaterial, then since they're equally next to each other, one is not more powerful than the other, right? They're very distinct and do different things, but they all serve the same function. They're both equals in the race, so to speak, to get to the finish line. Whereas the principles of the mercurial, in their most distinct concentrated form, have primacy over material and spiritual. And the rules that apply to them apply to us, but our rules do not apply to them. And they can look at us, both in the spiritual and the material, from their own observatory, where they have full access to knowledge on both ends that we couldn't of each other or ourselves. And there are bad, dark celestial dragons that are just twisted, demented thought. And then there are good, heavenly ones that are beautiful and wonderful and just have such beautiful, creative minds. And what'll happen sometimes, and I believe this is something that has physically occurred in our universe and has happened spiritually, is that these beings, they have access to both realms beneath them, but we don't have access to them, right? Maybe under really rare specific circumstances, like figures like Odin or the Buddha, maybe they could have sacrificed their souls and their bodies to reach the mercurial. But I believe it's a trickle-down effect. We can't really access that, but they can access us. And what does this look like? Well, the reason why I call them dragons is because, we look at the Chinese calendar. Each animal for a birth year, right? The dragon is a mixture of all of the animals on the calendar. And these animals represent certain mental traits, certain forms of intellect, right? And the dragon is this combination of all of it. It's the pig, the chicken, the snake. It's everything combined, right? So when these beings come down into the physical, they appear in the form of, they can form flesh and blood. Since they have primacy over the material and spiritual universe, they can modify the atoms and the molecules, protons and neutrons of material. They could get a rock or a bunch of rocks, a boulder, and reform it on a cosmic level to where they can convert it into a flesh and blood body with organs and a brain that is so intellectually advanced it's incomprehensible. And they can form the physical body of a physical dragon, of a worm or a wyvern, or the traditional Chinese and Japanese, Korean dragons. And when they physically manifest here or whatever, their physical form, their scales, their blood, their fire, their fire, most importantly, their breath represents, how do I put this? Intellect, right? They communicate telepathically to maintain their thoughts, because when they physically speak, they actually diminish their sentience. They diminish themselves. So if they're physically, verbally talking, they're becoming dumber and dumber and less powerful. If they maintain their thoughts, and then they can go back to the mercurial, right? I'm pretty sure they have to leave their physical bodies behind. But if they could bring their physical bodies to the mercurial, that would be, I'm not even going to touch that subject. No, we're not going to go there. But, their musculature, their physical traits, each and every form is a metaphor for their intellectual computing power. So when they physically show up in this universe, they are something else. It's the magnitude and beauty. Their form, no matter how big it is, no matter what color it is, represents some aspect of their intellect and their computing power. That they're like a computer that can exist without an actual CPU or data drive or anything, and they can build their own PC and then put their data in that PC if they want, right? And what I think happens is, as this physical creature, if it decides to physically mate and have sex, its offspring become more physical and maybe spiritual than conscious. And then those beings, you have an entire species of dragons that are of the physical realm, that are physical creatures. And maybe they lose their intellect over time and they become dumber and dumber. And then they just become physical animals that fly around and breathe fire. And then our ancestors kill them and become, basically mythological heroes. But I believe they have left their physical stock behind when they have explored the material universe. I think there are still physically celestial dragons that live in the material. And same thing spiritually. They can get spiritual antimatter, I guess, spiritual astral material, and build a soul and build a spirit, and then become an actual spirit. And as long as they maintain their intellect and keep growing in their intellect, they can leave the spirit world and go back. But if they get a little too invested, they will be trapped in the spirit world as a spiritual celestial dragon. So I believe there are dragon gods, dragon spirits, that were either descended or originally from the mercurial and have made themselves manifested in this typical Asiatic dragon form. And I think the other dragons that fly around that are beasts and monsters are their mentally diluted descendants that have become animals, right? Celestial dragons. That's that is like the height or whatever. So when people are like, oh, the physical world is inferior, it's a trap, it's a bad place, I want to ascend to the spirit realm and become a god. If there were a hierarchy and something were higher, you should look towards the realm of the mercurial, right? But you can't access that, so you just aren't satisfied with your material existence. So you'll trade one form of existence for another, in which you'll learn that you will not be satisfied there, right? You need to be satisfied with your place. And then when you learn your place, you're in no rush to die. You're in no rush to reach apotheosis. You enjoy the physical world. Same thing with spirits that are like, the spirit world is gay, and I want to incarnate and become a physical creature, become a politician, join the army. And then they learn that they're just as dead inside as they were in the spirit realm, right? So we're equals. The spirit realm, the astral realm, I think exist in a simultaneous balance with the physical. The mercurial, though, is fucked. It's fucked, and I don't want to go there. If I could physically walk into the spirit world, because I think physical material actually physically drift in the spirit world, so I think you could enter the astral as a physical flesh and blood human. It would be fucking weird. And it would probably be like a fish outside of water flying through the air like a bird, or a bird being submerged underwater. So I can't imagine that unless you have special disciplines or equipment that it's viable. And I think spirits can physically enter the spirit world. Now we're going to go a little bit into like Avatar, right? Because, again, pop culture, sometimes helping me make sense of things. I think, much like how they had this thing with the North and South Pole, and basically, when they activate the North and South Pole in the world of Avatar, the spiritual and the physical, the firmament dissolves, and it becomes one, and spirits physically walk amongst us, and humans physically walk amongst the spirits, and they exist in the same type of thing. I think the firmament, the veil can actually be dissolved, and the astral and physical can become so indistinguishable that it's actually one mono reality. But I think the veil exists for a reason, personally. But in that case, these Catan, these physical Lovecraftian beings, and their counterparts in the astral, I think in that case, if the veil is gone, they would just become one being, one of the same thing, if that makes sense. And it's very similar to the Dark Crystal, right? Where you have these like four-armed, peaceful little dudes. And if one of them dies, one of the, I think it's the Skeksis, the little vulture creatures, they die, right? And they're just, shards of the dark crystal, right? Manifested into physical flesh and blood beings. So when they die, across the world, another part dies, right? So I think that's the same thing, except I think if a Catan or material god dies, I think their spiritual equivalent remains the same, so to speak. But I believe they're using that example in so much as saying that they're reflective concepts that are manifestations of their own realm's interpretation of that reflective concept, if that makes sense, right? So where does this go with the spiritual and the physical? Where does it go with vampirism? So I want to explain the difference between a soul and a spirit. Now,